What's up, everyone? Topic of conversation for today, an ever popular conversation, and lots of questions that I get asked revolve around these sorts of things. Is my vice healthy? And this can be anything from caffeine to alcohol to now things like cannabis, THC, and hallucinogens like psilocybin that are gaining a lot of traction in research for depression, for end-of-life anxiety, for various types of mental health issues that don't seem to have other pharmacological effective interventions. So clearly all of these substances are very different, both in use and mechanism. So I'm not going to try and give some sort of blanket answer to all of them. But the simple answer, which is the short answer of whether vices are healthy or harmful, is it depends, which shouldn't surprise anybody. Although when people talk about all these things, it's, is coffee good or bad? Is alcohol good or bad? Is cannabis good or bad? On down the line. And you can't have a straight answer because it's all about your relationship with that thing, which needs to be looked at in a few different ways. So number one, is it habit forming? I know lots of people say things like cannabis and psilocybin and hallucinogens are not addictive, and that may be true, but they can certainly be habit forming. What determines if a substance is going to be habit forming or not in a consequential way is whether you use that thing to connect with reality more deeply or to escape reality. And anything that has a psychoactive effect has the ability to do both of those things. And this is why things like prescription drugs, opioids, are so problematic for the people who become addicted to them, is because it is an escape. It can be a very powerful escape from both physical and emotional pain. And the more you rely on a substance to escape, the more harmful it is going to be for you down the line. And you can look at this with something like alcohol, which is very commonly consumed by most people. Some people have one or two drinks in the evening just to relax and disconnect a bit. That's one thing. Some people use alcohol as a social lubricant. A social lubricant kind of sounds like a disgusting way to refer to alcohol, but to allow them to connect with other people without their own neuroticism getting in the way of having meaningful conversations. And that in itself can be a very positive thing, as long as you're not drinking yourself into physiological ramifications, which most commonly will come in the form of a hangover, which is, it's never good to drink yourself into that place. But then there's people who drink to escape reality, to escape the psychological pain and suffering of living. So I think that's the first question you need to ask yourself when it comes to any substance external that you put into your body that can alter consciousness or give you some sort of physical or psychological reward that can push you to use that substance more often and in greater quantities than is helpful. If you're using something to connect, to investigate yourself deeply, I think it can be a very positive thing, and it's very unlikely to be habit forming. If you're using something to escape reality, to numb yourself physically or psychologically, you are much more likely to become dependent on that substance in a very negative way. And then also, the poison is in the dose as well, right? So if this is something where, you look at something like coffee, someone who starts their day with the ritual of coffee and has one or two cups and then goes about their day, that's one thing. But if you rely on caffeine to get through your day every day, where you have 7 or 8 cups per day every hour up until 5 or 6 o'clock at night, some people even into the evening, that is an abusive relationship with that substance. So, of course, there's lots of complexities in here, right? Because some substances you can abuse thoroughly with much less of a physical or psychological damaging relationship or effect than you would with others, right? Clearly, caffeine is not going to carry the consequence that an opioid does. So that's a longer conversation than number one, I'm not a pharmacologist, so I'm not qualified to talk about. And number two, it would just, this isn't the time and place for that. But if you're asking yourself, is this good for me or is this bad for me? You can't outsource that question. I mean, there's some things that are clearly bad for you physically. The list is long on there, and there's many banned substances that fall into those categories for that reason. But when it comes to things that have a low physiological consequence, right? So all of those things, like alcohol certainly has a high physiological consequence when it's abused. Prescription drugs have a high physiological consequence when they're abused. But things like caffeine, like cannabis, THC, even hallucinogenic drugs, whether you're talking about the popular ones that people talk about today are like psilocybin, ayahuasca, DMT because of Joe Rogan, which is what is in ayahuasca, but people can go a direct route with that as well. All of these things have very mild to non-existent physiological consequences, but the psychological consequences of these sorts of things can be very high. You can go as extreme as bringing on psychosis and psychotic experiences. But for most people who would struggle with those sorts of things, I would say it's in more of a chronic way. So thinking about something as simple as cannabis, there's lots of weed smokers out there, lots of people taking THC. Is it good or bad? Is it healthy or unhealthy? Well, is this person smoking marijuana to escape the reality of their life? Or are they using it to connect more deeply with themselves, to learn things about themselves internally that allow them to grow into a better version of themselves? I think most people are likely going to fall into the latter category. They're looking for a mild change in reality, a mild change in perception in order to escape their actual reality every single day. And it's not that there is even something inherently wrong with that. If it's something you do on occasion and it's something that you do with mild doses and mild effects. But the person who starts and finishes their day with smoking marijuana and every hour in between, they're constantly putting that drug into their body in order to escape something psychologically or physiologically. I'm not saying that that's inherently a problem. There's some people who probably need that. Like when you look at people who suffer from things like PTSD, that might be a better alternative than living with the psychological malady that they're struggling with in the first place. But for people who don't have those sorts of clear psychological diseases, conditions, and you're using that sort of intervention just to escape your regular everyday life to the point where you're spending more time in an altered state of consciousness than you are in your real life, that is abuse and that is a problem, and you're likely not getting anything positive out of that thing. And if anything, you're getting something negative about it. So I'm talking a lot about drugs here just because they are current, popular, and obvious examples. But it goes for coffee, it goes for alcohol, it goes for everything in between. When you think about, oh, is this thing that I do on a somewhat regular basis, can I still be healthy with this thing? Or is it just a problem? Well, it depends, and it's about your relationship with it. And you need to be able to understand when something is abusive, when something is unhelpful, when something is not serving you. But we usually put the veil over our face, and we want someone else to say, oh, that's okay, that's healthy, so we can continue to abuse it without feeling bad about it. But if you're using any sort of substance, even with healthy intentions, and you're trying to cover up the clear and obvious destruction that is creating in your life, that is a huge problem. And some people can have that issue with coffee. Many people have that issue with alcohol. Some people have that issue with things like cannabis. And we look to people to say, oh, no, that's healthy, so we can justify the vice that is clearly problematic in our lives. So if you want to know, is this good or bad? Is this healthy or unhealthy? Is this helpful or harmful? Those are the questions you need to ask. Is it taking over your life? Has it become habit forming? Is it something that you now can't get through your day without doing? And again, there's conditions where maybe that's appropriate because the alternative is a big issue. But I'm not qualified to talk about people with diseases of the mind and what they should and should not do. I'm just talking about the average person here who likes to drink coffee, who likes to drink alcohol, maybe likes to smoke a little bit of weed, maybe now is thinking about experimenting with microdosing with LSD or hallucinogens or something like that. Someone who's not dependent because of a pre-existing condition or disease. If you want to know if something is good or bad for you, does it push you to connect or does it push you to disconnect? Anytime you are turning to something to escape, I think in the long run, if not in the short term, it's going to be a problem for you. So you need to be able to answer that question.